Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you live again. It is Thursday at about 10:40. Another somewhat crappy day here in the Midcoast, Maine. It is spring 2023. It This spring hasn't been very good weather-wise. It's been pretty crappy, so it's it is what it is. Eventually, I'm sure it will be spring-like. We had a few. I think we had 2 days where it was really nice. We had one day, probably about 2 weeks ago, where it was perfect. It was like 70. I think it even got up to, I think it was like 75 degrees, and it was on a Friday. And it was a beautiful sunny day, super clear. It was a perfect day out. But that's been about it. And it's been cold at night. It's been in the 30s, 40s at night, rainy, overcast. So yeah, eventually I'm sure it will. The tide will change. But hey, when it rains, I like rainy days, but when it's prolonged, it's a little bit sucky. But usually, rainy days are good days to watch movies. I don't generally watch movies. I have this funny thing. I don't usually watch movies during the day at all. I save my movie watching time for at night, and I really, like I've said before, I look at it as a really cool way for me to kind of like decompress the day from the day and to, just kind of unwind. Usually it's a really good way for me to kind of unwind before like I go to bed and my day's done. Especially, if I have, once in a while I have a super busy day. So it's usually great to that's like the ultimate thing that just kind of decompresses me usually. I generally don't watch movies super super late because I'm on a relatively early kick, at least for me. But I used to be, I'm still a night person, but I used to stay up really late. But generally I don't watch a movie or put in a new movie if it's like super uber late, especially if it's a new movie, because I'm getting, I'm kind of tired, fatigued, or whatever, and I might be dozing off. I generally never fall asleep to a movie. Um, Occasionally, when that does happen, it's a pretty telltale. I look at that as like a telltale sign for myself of where I, you know, am probably not fully invested in that film at the time. Even if I happen to watch it late, or like there's been times where I've gone to the theater, and I've been going to the movies lately, and I've been going with some friends, and we're usually we will usually like eat dinner or eat a pretty big dinner before we go to the movies. So if I fall asleep in the theater, which is really really rare, that's bad. Or if I start dozing off. The last time that happened to me was when I saw the Ant Man, the last or the most recent Ant Man movie, Quantum Mania, and I that movie was super long. It was almost 3 hours, and about 20 minutes to a half hour of that movie, I literally uh, fell asleep, and that was a pretty good indicator to me as to how I was probably going to feel about the movie afterwards or and during. But generally, I don't. I usually feel like if I go to a movie and I'm kind of tired or fatigued, and I'm just like, a little bit, full or whatever, I will, if I get the opposite reaction where it makes wakens me up. I feel awakened and I feel refreshed. I get my second wind, and I'm excited and I feel present. That's usually an indicator for me how how I'm reacting to the movie. Pretty common sense. I don't base. I pretty much base everything. When I check out a band for the first time, or it could be anything for the first time, or it's things that I revisit. But especially when it's the first time I'm interacting with something, whether it's a movie I've seen or a band I've seen, maybe it could be a local show that I've gone to, or a video that I've seen of a band, but usually in a live setting. Uh, or if I'm reading a book or something, and definitely in the theater, going to a theater event to see a movie. If I kind of base my first reaction to something on just my gut reaction, how I just react to it. And to me, that's like a really big indicator as to whether or not I'm enjoying the experience, and it's all subjective. So I don't really go into too many things where I'm trying to think about things too much or like be somewhat. I don't look at it as an intellectual thing. I just feel it's how your mind and body react to things. Generally, your first reaction to something is is generally how at least how I feel, is how your opinion. That's how your opinion and your experience is shaped. And generally, that initial reaction, well, for the most part, you don't really sway too much from that. Sometimes there's those exceptions of where you do feel significantly different after the experience or whatnot. But usually, at face value, that if you're present and it's happening in the moment, and you feel like this is a good experience, that's generally, or a bad experience, that's generally, I feel, at least in my world, that's gonna tell me what's going on for me. And I get that vibe too. Also, like with if I meet somebody, my first reaction when I meet somebody, or we like have I meet somebody, say, for the first time, and we have like a connection, something in common. There's just like you just have that camaraderie, and there's like it's fun and it's exciting. And I find the same thing happens to me for around relationships. It's just like the vibe, how a person vibes, and when they go into a room, you have that. I've had that experience too, where like somebody, you might go to a party, say, for instance, or you might just go over to say to you know out to an event, and you maybe a friend of yours is coming, but they bring someone else, and you're meeting them for the first time, and you have a little talk, and then there might be this little spark right away that just kind of goes off, of where you're like, wow, this person's cool, or I want to kind of get to know this person more. Or it could be the opposite. You just, that person's there, and you're just, it's not really vibing, or it's not really connecting, and it's just kind of ambiguous or whatnot. So I just kind of base all of my experiences around those things, kind of more or less at face value. Some things, like I said, sometimes they radically change, but generally I feel like it's it's not an intellectual kind of thing. I think it's just like a primal thing. Like you just a person, or a piece of art just has a certain kind of aura around it, and if it has that energy that connects with your energy, that's really it. That's kind of how I usually go about my daily my daily life, or my daily experiences. There's just kind of that connection. I feel that way. It comes out a lot too with my experience with playing music with folks. Where you can just feel if it's kind of connecting in the moment, or other times where it's not quite there, and it's I feel like if there isn't that symbiotic kind of thing, or the potential for there to be that symbiotic thing, it's probably not something you're going to go back to, or maybe even have the potential of connecting further. So it's always interesting. So today is a movie I've been wanting to talk about for a very, very long time. I've been doing some coverage of some really great vampire movies. The last vampire movie I did, actually, I've done two fairly recent videos on vampire movies. I did one on the new Nicolas Cage movie, Renfield, which I thought was really fun, a total blast. That was another example of of my reaction where I had went to the movies with a friend. We had had a big meal that day. I was, kind of dragging butt all day. I was a little bit on the tired side. Fairly busy day, I guess. And but we had a big meal. I hadn't eaten all day, and generally after I eat, especially if it's a bigger meal, I get pretty tired. But I went to it, and we went to it on a Wednesday night, and I was like, second wind kicked in, and I totally enjoyed that film. So, so I did a review on Renfield a few weeks ago. I saw that on a Wednesday night. I saw it opening weekend. Huge Nick Cage fan. He's amazing. He can't do anything wrong as far as I'm concerned. And then I also did a show on Near Dark, which is a movie that was directed by Catherine Bigelow. I think it's one of the greatest vampire movies ever. It's from the 80s, from like 1986. Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen. One of the most underrated vampire movies that I know of. There are people who do talk about it, but I feel like it's not. It's overshadowed by a lot of other vampire movies, but I think it's one of the best. It's a little bit dated. I think there's certain things about it that are a little bit. Um, there's well, I think the example of that movie that takes me out of that movie a little bit is the music. Some of the music is really kind of bludgeoning and a little bit intrusive, and it comes at these scenes of where you just feel like the scene just needed to be quiet, or the scene needed to just play out on screen as it was. It's a little bit heavy-handed with the music because it's very 80s, and the soundtrack's good, and the score is pretty good, but some of the music is not very good. And there's a lot of music in the film at times, particularly around certain scenes in that movie, that I do think it does kind of take you out of the movie. I do feel like I think as a whole, like that movie is awesome, and I highly recommend it. I have a great Blu-ray copy of it, but it's a little bit dated, and again, it's a funny fine balance, a fine line. I think about these things or those things a lot because generally I focus on the world of exploitation, and from a technical standpoint, a lot of those films are kind of a mess, but they just have a certain quality to them of where it works. I just was case in point. I was watching this movie that I just got last year. I was watching it. It's like the second or third time I've watched it. The other side, the other side of the mirror, which is a an amazing movie directed by Jess Franco, who is a Spanish exploitation director who I had seen some of his movies when I was a kid, but then this year I've really dove into like discovering him as a filmmaker, and I've been buying lots of his films. And I watched this film last night, and it's from the early '70s. It's definitely straight up a '70s movie, but it's got this whole giallo kind of vibe. It's very mysterious. It's very strange. But it's basically about this woman who is like coming to terms with her dad's suicide. And there's this whole like really horrible scene of where she actually comes across her dad the day of her wedding, and he has hung himself, and it's really like kind of messed up. And so she's obviously a wreck and destroyed, and she's trying to deal with that. But the film deals with that, but then it also deals a lot with her trying to move on, and her like being with her friends, and trying to move on with her life. But there's this supernatural element in the background, which is really subtle, that her father is kind of still alive, and her father is trying to contact with her, is trying to reach out to her. And it's a very ambiguous and strange movie. It's really sleazy, and it's kind of bad in a lot of ways with like some of the editing and some of the storyline because it's a little bit choppy. And even though it has those kinds of hiccups, I think it's a, a masterpiece. I think it. I almost feel like because of those little hiccups, it makes the film work because it just keeps the film it gives you this sense of being really off balance. And it does make sense. It is a cohesive story, but there's all these weird things that happen, and it's probably due because of the writing at times probably isn't that great, and maybe the editing isn't so great. It feels almost like it's two movies in one, but I almost feel like those quote unquote technical mistakes actually enhance the experience. It's kind of strange, and it's not like a conventional way to think of something that works, or that usually that would really take away from the experience. But I think in this way it really works. And I find that happens a lot with the exploitation movies, and where that rawness and that kind of one take aspect of some of the scenes makes it even more magical. And I feel like, whereas like Near Dark, which I think is probably one of the best vampire movies ever, super underrated. It has that quality too, but I feel it doesn't quite work in some ways. But that being said, I think as a whole, it's a really great movie. This movie today is a movie I think is easily one of the greatest vampire movies like ever. And that is Let the Right One In. This movie, I think, is easily one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. It's this bad boy right here. I unfortunately don't have it on Blu-ray, but I need to buy it. I think it's, yeah, like I said, it is easily one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's one of the creepiest movies ever done. I think it's one of the most inventive vampire movies ever made. It's a really great character study. It's got a level of where it's not predictable. There's aspects of this film that remind me of certain aspects that I attribute that are probably influenced by Salem's Lot, which was directed by Tobe Hooper, particularly around the children in that film. I always feel like it has that vibe, particularly because Let the Right One In is centered around the kids. And when a horror film has the centerpiece of in general, I think for a horror film or children, it makes the film even creepier in a lot of ways. Especially if it gets into the a childlike, the child's or the child's dynamic, or their relationships with their peers or with their family. That, if it's done really, really well, it can be incredibly creepy and create this atmosphere. And Let the Right One In, like I said, is easily one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. It's a Swedish film. It came out in 2008. I remember seeing this probably that year when it had come out on video, on DVD, and I was just blown away by it. I bought this copy when I think it was, yeah, Movie Gallery. Movie Gallery used to be a big movie video rental franchise, and they closed, well, quite a few years ago now. And they had a big sale, and they were getting rid of everything, and I bought this on DVD. And this is a really great copy. It's got some really great special features on here. I do need an upgrade of this desperately, because this movie is just like amazing. Like I said, it was directed by Thomas Alfredson, a pretty famous Swedish director. And the film is basically centered on this 12-year-old girl who is a vampire, and it's her relationship to this other boy and their friendship, but then it leads to where they kind of fall in love, and it deals with like that dynamic and with her family's dynamic. And the atmosphere for this film is so utterly creepy. It takes place during the winter. There's all these beautiful shots of the snow and in the woods. It's such a really high end, high level film. It's a Swedish film, English subtitles. Um, it's got some of the greatest kills, I think. Particularly if you've never seen this film without giving it away, there's the last sequence in the film, which is this really big, just this huge build up to this climactic ending that involves this pool. And I won't say anything more if you've never seen it. That is just horrific and terrifying. And again, this movie, I always say like the things that I love when I really get into a movie, or I really fall in love with a movie. The thing that usually always sells me on the film more than really anything else is if the film has a real rich kind of atmosphere where it just feels like you're the world the world building for that movie is so transformative, and for that duration of the time that you're watching the film, you're lost in that world. And this film exemplifies that, is truly an exemplar of that. Just a gorgeous film from a technical level. The cinematography, the acting is just tremendous. There, and like I said, the cast: Linda Linderson, who plays the lead vampire, Ellie; Care Hamblenot, and these are all Swedish actors. Patrick Rydemark, who plays Connie, who plays like this kind of bully. The other thing that this film gets into is like peer-to-peer bullying that happens in this school, and how vicious other kids can be on other kids, or where they become predators. And it's also a little bit of a revenge tale with the film. There's also a little bit of kind of a serial killer element. There's a character in the film that Ellie, the lead, the main vampire, has captive, and he's basically her servant, and he has to go out and kill these people to bring their bodies and to give her blood. And it's horrific. It starts off with that kind of relationship of where you see this guy who is her slave, and he's basically going out on these rampages and killing these people, and it's terrifying. And it has like this very interesting thing, because it feels like it's almost like a portrayal of a serial killer. It has a little bit of a realistic application, but without a doubt, it is a full-on 100% vampire movie. And I never really. This movie was highly acclaimed when it came out. It was very much talked about, but I never see it talked about now. A lot of guys and girls that I watch on YouTube who do like their top 10 or top 20 horror movies or vampire movies and those kinds of things. I never hear this movie mentioned. And this came out, quite a few years ago now, 2008. And I feel like this movie deserves to be talked about more, especially now. And probably amongst those folks that spend a lot of time doing these top tier reviews of the greatest vampire movies, ever made. And I think Let the Right One In is easily one of the greatest. I think it's by today's standards, I think it's incredibly underrated, and it's just from beginning to end, it is a masterpiece. There was actually a remake of the film that came out, which was like, this is a Swedish version with English subtitles. There was an American version that came out probably about 8 years ago, or maybe a little less. That was directed by Matt Reeves, who is actually one of my favorite directors. And it's called Let Me In, and it's actually really good. It's very original. It pays homage to the original Swedish version, but it does some very different things with the story and the way the whole narrative is. It's still centered on these kids and this girl who is the vampire, but it's very different, and it's really good. It's actually really, really great. Matt Reeves is one of those rare guys that can take essentially do these remakes of certain movies and does something completely different and original with that material. He's done that well with most recently the Batman with Robert Pattinson, which is just an amazing movie, easily my favorite Batman movie of all time, and also he did a remake of one of the Planet of the Apes movies, which is really great. He actually did two out of the trilogy, and it's awesome. Like it's really awesome. I'm gonna eventually do. That might be my next big show. I'm gonna do a big franchise coverage of the all of the uh, Apes movies, including the old ones. But I do like the new ones quite a bit. But getting back to the original, it is, yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, it is a masterpiece. And Thomas Alfredson, he's done quite a few movies. He also did a spy thriller, which is actually really good. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, that which which starred Gary Oldman, and that's like a classic spy thriller movie, but very good and really high end, really high end quality work. He did a film called The Snowman in 2017, which I haven't seen. Set up for Johan Gosling, Four Shades of Brown, and another Swedish film, and it's Screwed in Talon in 1999. But really, I think from what I gather that this is the only vampire or only horror movie he's ever directed. But he's a really highly skilled director, and I definitely want to check out more of his films. The only other film of his that I've seen is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a really great movie, really great spy thriller. Super, it's a super slow burn of a movie, but really great. And again, the atmosphere is just terrific. But like I said, I definitely need to buy this. I desperately need to get an upgrade for Let the Right One In, because I have this DVD copy and it's good, really actually great. But this movie deserves a better experience. So I will definitely get this at some point when I in my travels. But Let the Right One In, 2008, easily one of the greatest vampire movies ever made. If you've never seen this movie, I highly recommend it. It's a masterpiece from top to bottom. Everything from the direction, the cinematography, the film score, the acting, the story, the atmosphere, the kills, everything. Utterly original, utterly original and fresh and new, and really creepy and scary. So this is Jason Dean here at Film Fanatic. We will see you next time. And also, I did put up a little post on Facebook yesterday, but I have a big announcement. I'm not going to announce who it is yet. I want to make sure everything is set and ready to go before I do it. But I just lined up a huge guest for this page. I love, my favorite thing to do for this channel are the interview segments. I haven't done an interview segment in quite some time, and that's usually because it does take a lot of time to schedule a guest and to try to make out just the logistics of that. And I've been wanting to go into a certain kind of area with the interview segments, so I'm hoping that this will be the start of something at a higher level for this channel. And I am super excited. I got a really huge guest lined up, and we're going to be recording the video this weekend. And and the other thing about this show is that it's also, this actress that I have lined up is also in, I think, one of the greatest horror movies ever made. That's kind of where I'm going to leave it. So stay tuned when I'll do, if everything works out and everything is set, I will obviously post the video and you'll see it everywhere. But super excited for this, and I'm hoping everything works out and this will be kind of the next phase to where I can bring this channel to a higher level. So thanks again for your support, and thanks to all the new subscribers and the folks commenting on these videos. I really, really appreciate it. and have a great day. And we will see you next time. Peace.